A biblical perspective on life, culture and current events. This is 2020 on Vision.
It is the Wednesday edition of 2020, and at this time, on a Wednesday, we love to check in with Mandy Worby and the latest detail as to what's coming out of Israel on the developments really more broadly right across the Middle East. Mandy, a special welcome back.
It's amazing how, hi, nice to be with you. And welcome back to you too after a break last week.
Yes.
Yeah, it's amazing how, the war is basically taking place in Gaza, it's Israel, but because of basically the terrorist proxies all throughout the Middle East, it's encompassing that whole region. Yeah, so very, very interesting.
Yes. Hey, let's start with some of the developments, I guess you'd call it politically, diplomatically. I remember just in the news about 30 minutes ago, we heard Jaden telling about Mike Huckabee installed as the US ambassador to Israel. You've got a few details around that installation?
He arrived last Thursday in Israel, and the very first thing he did on Friday, so last Friday, the first thing he did was go to the Western Wall. But I do need to just backtrack a little bit because you go, okay, it's another ambassador. Whoop-de-doo. Nobody really understands what a monumental appointment this is. My understanding is that throughout history, every US ambassador that has been appointed and sent to Israel has always been a Jewish American. Mike Huckabee is a Gentile, not just a Gentile, but he's a Christian. And anybody knows anything about church history, that is massive. And the fact that he has been literally welcomed, like joyfully, ecstatically, to Israel is like, that's massive. So kudos to him. He's built a great reputation as being a great friend of Israel. He's been to Israel about 100 times. So he loves Israel. So his appointment is really something.
So he's landed on the ground and he's wanting to run as soon as he gets going. What's he been doing to make an impression?
Right. First day on the job was Friday. He went straight to the Western Wall. And that was because he had a tiny little prayer on a little piece of ripped paper from President Trump that was written in a Sharpie. And what was his prayer? His prayer was for peace in Israel, signed DT. And so he went immediately to the wall on last Friday and put that in the cracks of the big stones at the Western Wall. That was the first thing he did. The next thing he did was over Easter weekend, which is just gone, this past weekend. He went to the Garden Tomb to attend an early morning service to celebrate the death, the burial, and the resurrection of Jesus Christ. I don't think that has ever been done by a US ambassador to Israel, so that was historic. But he said something about being an ambassador. He said, when you're an ambassador, it means that you're representing someone else's message rather than your own. And then went on to say, we have the opportunity to be representatives not only of our government, but also representatives of Jesus Christ. And you remember Paul wrote to the Corinthians and said that we're ambassadors of Christ, and therefore we should represent him, not ourselves. So that was pretty impressive.
What about diplomatic meetings when you're the US ambassador? And I think, that's substantial that he's been celebrated because he's Christian, as you say, Gentile and Christian, not Jewish. So you might even appreciate that there could be some tensions in there.
It's massive.
But then he's met too with the Jewish leadership.
Remember, he hasn't been there a week yet. He hasn't been there 1 week yet. And he met with President Herzog and confirming with him that the main priorities is that Iran cannot get nuclear weapons. If they were to get a nuclear bomb, they're just crazy enough to use it. That can't be allowed to happen, and that every effort needs to be made to bring the remaining 59 hostages home. And he also had a meeting with Dr. Balki from the WHO. Now, Dr. Balki asked him to put pressure on Israel to allow more humanitarian aid into Gaza. Now, we've talked about this before. No other nation that is attacked by a foreign enemy is then required to provide all of the physical humanitarian needs of the country that just attacked them. Only Israel is expected to do that. And so Ambassador Huckabee basically told the doctor that what really needs to happen is that for the pressure to be placed where it should be, solely on Hamas, who caused this war, and that the pressure needs to be brought to bear so that they will lay down their arms, release the hostages, and then the aid will flow.
Okay, let's talk Syria. So we're talking now northeast of Israel, geographically, and the nation of Syria, and they've just had all their upheavals, and
it's crazy there at the moment. It's bad.
Got rid of the Assad regime and replaced it with an Al Qaeda connected,
ISIS wannabe,
terrorist related organisation. So, okay, what's happening in Syria?
Well, apart from the Christian and Alawite communities being butchered that the world seems to ignore, what's happened is that Israel's Chief of General Staff, A.L. Zamir, he said, "We hold key positions and are on the front line to defend ourselves as best as possible." Now, he's talking about Mount Hermon. Mount Hermon is a huge mountain. It crosses 3 borders, Lebanon, Syria and Israel, but it's generally accepted that it's owned by Israel and Syria. And they've taken a portion of that, and the only reason they actually went in there is because of this new terrorist regime that's moved in there. It's only because of the collapse of Syria. That they've gone in there. And it gives them a vantage point that they can see all movement and anyone approaching. So it's very, very strategic. Don't forget, Iran, which used to have the stronghold in Syria, they are now trying to build a relationship with the new regime because they fled when the new regime came in. They're trying to build a relationship with them because they want to establish more routes to funnel more weapons through Syria to Hezbollah to rearm them. Israel's not going to tolerate that, which is why that buffer zone in the north is important. And then don't forget Turkey. Turkey is the power and support behind the new Syrian regime. Israel doesn't want Turkey on their doorstep either. Right now, as we speak, Turkey is hosting the leaders of Hamas. Now, if they're hosting the leaders of Hamas, in my humble opinion, and what would I know, but I know that NATO actually has in its rules that you're not supposed to work with, support or be in favour of or working with terrorists. So Turkey should get the boot, but Israel doesn't want them on their border, so it's touchy up there.
And I guess not everybody sees organisational heads as terrorists, but there's obviously an international way of being able to assess that.
If you're part of Hamas, you're a terrorist.
Yes. Come back to Gaza, because the IDF, they've been working hard to dismantle a lot of the terrorist infrastructure there. What's developing in Gaza?
A lot's happening in Gaza. Just over, I want to say over the last 24, 48 hours, they destroyed 40 machines, like big trucks that were used. Some of them were actually used on October 7. But during the war, these big vehicles have been used against IDF soldiers for planting explosives, digging underground routes, breaching fences, clearing rubble to gain access to hidden munitions. And so demolishing these hopefully is going to diminish Hamas's abilities to continue waging the attacks. Because we learned from one of the hostages that was released that the guy who had him, the terrorist who was holding him, constantly dug tunnels. So the tunnel digging has not stopped. So every time Israel blew up a tunnel, Hamas was already digging new ones. I mean, the underneath, I'm surprised that everything hasn't just collapsed in on the Gaza Strip. It's like Swiss cheese under the surface with the tunnels. The IDF are also sectioning the Gaza Strip. What they've done is they've made what's called the Morag Corridor, which is between Rafah and Khan Yunis, because they want to stop the terrorists from reaching either city. And so they've increased their own traffic there to prevent the terrorists from moving around freely. They're really trying to isolate them, and they think that Hamas has 2 incomplete battalions in Rafah, and they think that they're down to dozens as opposed to hundreds or even thousands. At least that's their hope. And then there has also been video online of quote-unquote protests by Gazans against Hamas. Now, usually any kind of opposition to Hamas results in very severe, very bloody, very brutal, very public attacks from Hamas. Most of these protests against Hamas have resulted in nothing. So people are thinking they're actually pro-Hamas, but they're pretending to be in opposition to get the sympathy of the world to open up and allow aid in. But we do know that at least one young Arab man whose father is a tribal leader of one of the Arab clans in there, because it's all very tribal in there, was opposed Hamas. He was tortured in the most unbelievably horrific ways and was murdered. When the families and the friends found the Hamas man who did that, the terrorist who did it, he then met a very brutal end. It's horrible in there. So some of it is legitimate, some of it is highly questionable. But what they're wanting, sympathy to open up the borders to let in aid. And, of course, the efforts in Judea and Samaria, the area the world calls the West Bank. There's terrorists in there in the towns and cities under the PLO control, and the IDF continue to uproot. They're always finding more weapons stores and terrorist infrastructure. That's going to be ongoing.
Mandy, what do you understand about the remaining hostages that are being held by Hamas in Gaza? And really, as we often will say, the end of any conflict will depend on those hostages being released. Is there any sort of update you've got on that?
Well, I know that the Israelis have put forward ceasefire plan after ceasefire plan after ceasefire plan, and they're always met with no from Hamas. Hamas wants to maintain power. Israel won't tolerate it. There are currently 59 hostages in Gaza. It's believed 24 of them are still alive, and their conditions are reprehensible. One of the hostages, his name is Elkanan Bobot, he has had 3 videos released of him, just snippets. He looks very sick and he looks very weak. They actually forced him to pretend to be on a phone call, having a desperate conversation with his family and about how much he misses them and the children. The family have had no contact for him. It's all propaganda. But what it's designed to do is, 1, torture Israelis and the family, and to have Israelis fighting against Israelis. Do whatever you have to, just anything, agree to anything. Well, Israel can't do that because it's just going to result in more people being, kidnapped and destroyed.
Let's talk about some of the propaganda, the global ways that Hamas might be trying to get its message out. There's this thing called a Day of Rage.
Yeah.
What is it? What's that all about?
Okay, well, this is part of the terrorist playbook, and the Palestinians have been doing this for decades and decades. Back in 2010, in the Jewish quarter, was the rebuilding of the Hurva synagogue. The Palestinians, or the PLO, called for a day of rage, saying that the Al-Aqsa Mosque was under attack. Well, the Al-Aqsa Mosque is on the Temple Mount. It's nowhere near the Hurva synagogue. But the day of rage was to incite violent reaction to just go out and kill Jews and attack them. Well, because Hamas is under pressure, they don't have the money now to be paying all of their terrorists because aid is cut off. They can't steal it and then sell it at exorbitant prices, the free aid that they're selling at exorbitant prices. So they're running out of money, and so they're calling for a global day of rage. And that was for Tuesday. That was yesterday, Australia, today around the world. And they're calling for everybody who's pro-Hamas and anti-Israel to just rise up and, be violent and rage. And so the Israeli government and officials have been warning Israelis around the world, don't even look Israeli, don't have any Jewish symbols, don't have anything that's identifiable, and stay away from any of the protests because you are going to be in grave danger. So we're praying that is going to fail.
Okay, so even as we speak right now,
yes,
they're in the middle of what is
a day of rage,
and they're looking to extend that to a global focus.
Yes. Yeah.
And anyone who is Jewish and has any sort of Israeli symbols would need to be very cautious because they may well be targets while there's a day of rage.
I might add, I've got my little high and my Star of David. I won't be hiding that myself. I won't be hiding that. And my dog tag and my little yellow ribbon. They're not coming off.
Okay. All right, let's talk Lebanon just for these last few minutes. Sure. Lebanon, fighting continuing because Hezbollah continues to break the ceasefire agreement, which makes the agreement void.
It does.
What's happening there?
Right, well, Israel is being very strategic in their targeting only the Hamas, the Hezbollah terrorists themselves, and also Jamar Islamiyah terrorists, because they've joined with Hezbollah. So they're being very strategic, very pinpoint in their attacks against them. But what was interesting is that the Iranian ambassador to Lebanon. His name is Mujtabi Amani. He actually was injured during the pager incident.
Oh, yep.
Everybody was wondering, what was the Iranian ambassador doing with terrorist pagers? But nobody wants to ask that question. And the current Lebanese foreign minister, his name is Youssef Raji. He is of the Lebanese Forces Party. It's a Christian party. He called the Iranian ambassador in and reprimanded him because Amani posted on a tweet saying the issue of disarmament of Hezbollah is a clear plot aimed at weakening regional armies while the US continues to arm the Zionist entities representing Iran. He warned against falling for this trap. That got him into trouble because they don't want Iran meddling in their affairs and psyching people up. I'm just praying that Minister Youssef Raji doesn't get attacked for standing up against the Iranians.
Okay. Well, there's a lot of sad, disturbing, violent stories that we often talk about in this segment. Have you got anything positive to say, to end off what we're talking today?
I do. It's not often you get feel-good or, happy ending stories, but this one is beautiful. I watched the video and can I just tell you, I had something in my eye, Neil, and my eyes were leaking. It was just something in my eye. On October 7, as we know, several hundred, 250-odd people were kidnapped. Many of them died. Some have been released. Some remain, as we've talked. But there was a little King Charles Spaniel named Billy was stolen from the kibbutz near Oz. And there was a soldier in Gaza who saw her. And he picked her up a couple of weeks ago now. He picked her up and took her back to Israel. They checked her microchip and identified her as belonging to a family in kibbutz near Oz. And he drove down and he gave this little dog, Billy, back to her owner. And I got to tell you, there was crying and weeping and joy and hugs, lots of tail wagging, big hugs for the soldier who handed this dog back. It was just nice that there was another family reunion, albeit including the canine kind. And that because that family lost a lot on October 7.
And you are renowned for loving your pets. And I know there'll be a lot of listeners thinking, a little King Charles Spaniel recovered. That is a good story.
Yeah, it was beautiful.
Mandy Worby, thank you so much. Another wonderful update on things that are developing in Israel and more broadly across the Middle East. Thanks so much for being with us.
My pleasure.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.